Today I'm going to talk about literary theories. I'm going to do a series because first, you like it. Second, I also very much like theories because they might look daunting, elusive, but once you get to know them, you start to like them. So today I'm going to talk about structuralism. I base my contents on this book, Beginning Theory. I'll be talking about its definition, key figures, and criticism example. First, about definition. So structuralism is an intellectual movement that began in France in 1950s and it became widespread all over the world in the 1970s. Its core belief is that things cannot be understood in isolation but in the context of the larger structures that they are part of. So there are two key figures that I want you to know about. The first is the linguist Saussure. So he believes that language is arbitrary, relational, constitutive. Arbitrary. Language is not a reflection of the world, but a system that stands separate from it. So while we call a heart, this is arbitrary. Relational. The language can be defined in isolation from other words. A mansion is bigger and grander than a mere house, but not as big and grand as a palace. Constitutive. Language constitutes our world, not just recording or labeling it. So we have distinct names, spring, summer, winter, autumn for different seasons, but actually the year runs continuously without any breaks. So seasons are a way of seeing the year, but not an objective fact of nature. Saussure's way of thinking about language very much influenced the structuralists because it gave them a model of a system which is self-contained, in which individual items relate to each other and creates larger context and create larger structures. So when discussing Dickens' novel Hard Times, instead of going straight into the content, these theorists focus on the structure, symbol, design, like Hard Times' deviations from novelistic conventions. The second figure you need to know is Roland Barthes, who applied structuralism in the general field of modern culture. He looks at a host of items which had never been intellectually analyzed, like the difference between wrestling and boxing. Boxing is seen as a sport concerned with repression and endurance, while in wrestling, pain is flamboyantly displayed. Boxers do not cry out in pain when hit, and wrestlers grunt with aggression and display agony or triumph in an exaggerated way. So these two sports both have their different functions within society. Boxing enacts the stoic endurance which is necessary in life sometimes, while wrestling dramatizes struggles between good and evil. This is how Barthes structuralized and contextualized an individual item. In the process of doing this, layers of significance can be revealed. Let's talk about the key notions of Roland Barthes. In his book SZ, published in 1970, he reduced the complexity and diversity in fiction to 5 codes. The proaeretic code, which provides indications of actions. They begin again. Hermeneutic code, which poses questions to provide narrative suspense. He knocks on a certain door in the neighborhood of pale streets, which makes the reader wonder who lived there. Culture code, which contains references beyond the text which is regarded as common knowledge. Agent Angeles was the kind of man who sometimes arrives at work in odd socks, evokes a pre-existing image in the reader's mind, a stereotype of incompetence which, when contrasted with the image of efficiency contained in the word agent, things become interesting. And the semic code and symbolic code are both linked to theme, with the latter focusing on a larger scale. Symbolic code is about the most basic binary polarities like the male and female, day and night. And finally, let's look at a structuralist criticism example. So the last two codes we just have mentioned have generated the most difficulty, so Beginning Theory elaborates on them with two more detailed examples. The first example is on symbolic code, and the text is Allan Poe's The Overt Portrait. Here's a plot summary. During the Civil War in a European country, a wounded officer takes refuge in an abandoned chateau. The room he sleeps in contains an extremely lifelike portrait of a young woman, and a written account of this portrait, which he finds in the room, tells how the artist was his husband. The husband had become so carried away with the creation of the portrait that he failed to notice that while life was kindled in the painting, it simultaneously drained away from the sitter. At the end of the tale, the placing of the final touch of color which renders the portrait's perfect coincides with the death of the sitter. So for structuralists, they tend to analyze these following things on the left hand: parallels, echoes, reflections, repetitions, contrasts, and patterns in plot, structure, character, motive, situation, circumstance, language, and imagery. There are actually many levels of contrasts in this story, but here I'll only talk about two of them. The first one is that the tale itself has binary structure. It is made up of two contrasting halves. So the first half is a first-person account of the wounded officer, while the second is a story within story which he reads on the painting. The first half is leisurely, ponderous, while the second reflects a frenzy of artistic creation. And the second contrast lies in the chateau itself, which performs very different functions in the two halves. In the first half, it is a place of refuge for the officer, while in the second, it's a place of danger and then ultimately destruction for the sitter. The second example is on semicode. So semicode operates through the nuances of individual words and phrases. The best way to appreciate it is to use close procedure, delete words, and to have readers fill in the blanks. The text here is Mervyn Jones' novel, Mr. Armitage Isn't Back Yet. John Edward Scott Armitage, 55 years old, 5 feet 11 inches tall, weighs 13 stone 3 watt. So here are two words for you to choose from, pounds or ounces. The word in the published text is ounces, very precise, which suggests a man with a very precise and ordered attitude to life. Today we've talked about the definition, the key figures and key notions, and finally 2 examples of structuralist. So that's all for today, and see you next time with some other theory.